On a very dark day in America, this is the first major airline disaster we have had in the United States in many a year. And on days like this, and unfortunately, if you do this as long as I have, beginning in 1990, you've gone through a lot of days like this. All I try to do is not make it worse for anyone who's connected to the disaster. The American Airlines jet, the Black Hawk helicopter, 67 human beings are dead. Most of them are Americans. I do not know who's at fault. I've listened to everything. I want to play it for you, what has been said thus far. I'll talk to Michael Duncan and others. There's also a hostage released today in Israel I want to update you on. There are a lot of stories, but as to commenting on causation, I have no knowledge. No one in the media does. Some people in the government might, and they will step forward and give us details as it is available. People have hunches, people have beliefs. All I am reminded of is an interview I did in 1996 for PBS with Rabbi Harold Kushner, author of When Bad Things Happen to Good People. All anyone can do for the family and friends of the 67 people who are dead is show up and shut up and not make it worse. Don't tell them you know how you feel. You don't. You can cut their grass. You can get them groceries. I also think today of everyone who has lost a loved one in a sudden fatal accident. Not in a war, not in an invasion, not in an attack like 9/11. I was live that day. It's very difficult to be on the air when something like that happens. You do the best you can, and we did the best we could 24 years ago. But the one thing you don't want to do is pretend that it's about you. It's not about me. It's not about anybody. I have some condemnation for last night's posters who were just ghoulishly engagement farming. That's depraved. That's absolutely depraved. They have no business doing that, attempting to assign blame to Donald Trump. I couldn't believe it last night. They were in the water looking for people. But I do want to emphasize, it's not about me. It's not about you, unless you're a family member or a close friend of one of the victims. And that's about you and your suffering, and the appropriate response for everyone is to mourn with those who mourn. That is a Christian injunction. Mourn with those who mourn. It's a very terrible situation. There will be answers. National Traffic Safety Board is very good at this. In the old days, when I was practicing law, I had a law partner, Tim Cook, still a friend. He's retired too from the practice of law. Aircraft disaster specialist. He had been a A6 pilot in Vietnam, and he went to law school and Department of Justice. And when we would have airplane crashes around the world, Tim would always make himself available and talk about aerodynamics and what looked like, et cetera. There's been enough of that, and Tim is retired, and I'm retired. I have no idea whether it's the Black Hawk helicopter, whether it's air traffic control, whether it's the American Airlines pilot out of their lane. I have no idea. Nobody does. But I did appreciate that the first thing I saw this morning was Secretary of Defense Hegseth making this comment, this release, cut number 10.
All right, update this morning. Just got off the phone with the Southcom commander and the chairman, the Joint Chiefs, talking about our efforts at Guantanamo Bay. That is ongoing. We're leaning forward on supporting the president's directive to make sure that we have a location for violent criminal illegals as they are deported out of the country. No one's going to wait on the Defense Department, and we're working that in real time. But I also wanted to give an update on the tragedy that happened last night here in Washington, D.C., and provide a little bit more information as we are actively working to investigate and understand what occurred and why. At about 8:48 last night, a UH-60 assigned to the U.S. Army Aviation Brigade in the Military District of Washington, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, collided tragically with a civilian airliner. The unit involved, the Army unit involved, was Bravo Company 12th Aviation Battalion at Fort Belvoir. It was an annual proficiency training flight. And when we look at the crew, and not all kin have been notified, so we're going to withhold ranks and names at this point. We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew, and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles. The 12th Aviation Battalion, as of now, is granted a 48-hour operational pause on contingency missions as what happened is reviewed, and a senior level aviation team, an investigative team from our Aviation Safety Center was deployed last night and already is in Washington, D.C. to investigate what's going on. We anticipate that the investigation will quickly be able to determine whether the aircraft was in the corridor and at the right altitude at the time of the incident.
That's the key thing. There are questions to be answered that the Secretary of Defense cannot answer about the civilian airliner or about his Black Hawk crew, but I am confident that they will be transparent. This morning, John Thune, Majority Leader for the Republican, went to the Senate floor and did this, cut number 4.
Mr. President, before I begin, I want to comment on last night's horrific tragedy. As most now know, last night around 9 p.m., a passenger flight out of Wichita, Kansas, coming into Reagan National Airport, collided with a Black Hawk helicopter based out of Fort Belvoir. As recovery efforts continue, authorities confirmed that they do not expect any survivors. Mr. President, there are few words and instances like this. Only our heartfelt prayers for those who have received unbearable news over the past few hours, and our gratitude for rescue personnel who spent the night searching for survivors and remain on the river. It's too early to know why last night's crash occurred, but we're going to find out. And Congress and federal agencies will be closely examining this tragedy to ensure that America's skies are safe. Mr. President, my prayers today are with all those suffering, with our first responders, and with our Kansas senators and everyone affected by this terrible event.
Then President Trump went to the White House press room to deliver a 17-minute statement, followed by questions. I can't play that all. Here's the beginning of it, cut number 1.
Thank you very much. I speak to you this morning in an hour of anguish for our nation. Just before 9 p.m. last night, an American Airlines regional jet carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter carrying 3 military service members over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., while on final approach to Reagan National Airport. Both aircraft crashed instantly and were immediately submerged into the icy waters of the Potomac. Real tragedy. The massive search and rescue mission was underway throughout the night, leveraging every asset at our disposal, and I have to say the local, state, federal, military, including the United States Coast Guard in particular, they've done a phenomenal job. So quick, so fast, it was mobilized immediately. The work has now shifted to a recovery mission. Sadly, there are no survivors. This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly, and we are a country of really, we are in mourning. This has really shaken a lot of people, including people, very sadly, from other nations who were on the flight. For the family members back in Wichita, Kansas, here in Washington, D.C., and throughout the United States and in Russia, we have a Russia contingent, some very talented people. Unfortunately, were on that plane. Very, very, very sorry about that. Whose loved ones were aboard the passenger jet. We can only begin to imagine the agony that you're all feeling. Nothing worse. On behalf of the First Lady, myself, and 340 million Americans, our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now and in the days to come. We'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come. We're here for you to wipe away the tears and to offer you our devotion, our love, and our support. There's great support. In moments like this, the differences between Americans fade to nothing compared to the bonds of affection and loyalty that unite us all, both as Americans and even as nations. We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers. That icy, icy Potomac, it was a cold, cold night cold water. We're all overcome with the grief for many who have so tragically perished. Will no longer
I think the
be with
president's
us.
statement there, the opening of it was perfect. There's controversy that follows, and the question and answers with the press is inevitable. But there is, in that statement, the statement of Majority Leader Thune, and the statement of Secretary Hegseth, the appropriate and measured tone. We don't know who caused this. A lot of suspect. We don't know. It'll be a while till we know, but it's a tragic day. As Rabbi Kushner said, show up and shut up for those who've been directly affected. Joined by Michael Duncan of the Ruthless Podcast, one of the four fellas. Hello, Michael.
Hello, good to see you.
Good to see you. It's a very dark day in D.C. I normally trundle past Reagan 3 times a week, so it's just shocking to me. But I wanted to ask you a different question. I listened to the Ruthless Podcast, which you guys recorded yesterday on my run this morning. Mm-hmm. And it's a great podcast. I'll come back to it. But have you guys been on the air long enough to have to handle a disaster day? Because disaster days come along, 9/11, 10/7. I've been doing this for 30 years. They're hard days to broadcast. They're really difficult. Have you had to do one of those yet?
Yeah, October 7th. It was tough. It was very, very tough. You know, you want to give weight to the seriousness of the moment, for your listeners. But our show is also a variety program, and so people come to us for all the news of the day and some yucks. It's tough to get to the yucks when you have to cover news like that. But
I was thinking about that.
I guess.
Yeah, this morning, last night, because you guys recorded Ruthless before the disaster. Mm-hmm. Last night I get home and I go to X, and the ghouls are out. And by ghouls, I mean people. Smug was all over them, who were attempting to make political hay. It's really it's depraved. Did you see the same stuff?
I did. Bodies in the icy Potomac River, and some people, depraved people, their first thought is, how can I make this Donald Trump's fault? I mean, it's disgusting stuff. But, the kumbaya moment we were having in December after the election, where we thought maybe these Democrats had learned a lesson, we're far away from that now.
And it's not about anyone in D.C. who's not in the water. It's not about anyone not related to or a close friend of the victims. But, boy, people try really hard to make it about themselves. And I'm glad, I think you had a couple of scornful posts as well, but Smug really took the hatchet out on a few of these ghouls, one of whom I'm not going to name, backed off and apologized as is appropriate. Others did not. It was just really one of the more depraved moments in media. I want to bring up a different story that you guys did touch on today, which was the OMB pause of discretionary spending and the fact that a federal judge got involved. But you did not mention, I wondered, did anyone brief you guys on who the judge is?
It's that McConnell guy, right?
No.
I don't know the background.
It's Judge Ali Khan, who was confirmed in 2023, and she is a Biden appointee who has been on the bench she was confirmed 51-50, the vice president casting the tie-breaking vote. The reason I bring it up is Holmes or you said a judge got involved. Can you believe it? And I thought to myself, these guys don't know, and it's interesting. They don't care. That's the right way to do it. But
right.
When Trump was being pursued in Florida, we never saw, and check me on this if you disagree, I think almost every story about the Florida prosecution of Trump mentioned that Eileen Cannon didn't have much time on the bench and that she was a Trump appointee. It was like they made her the story, and they didn't make Judge Ali Khan the story. In this, is there one standard or 4 standards, Michael Duncan?
Yeah, that's right. When it's a judge ruling against a Republican, they're beyond reproach, right? But when it's a situation like Eileen Cannon, suddenly it's the Trump-appointed judge is making a decision, that is in his favor, right? There is 2 standards when it comes to jurisprudence in this country when the media is reporting on it, for sure, 100%.
Yeah, if the judge is a Republican appointee and that somehow advances left-wing narrative by legacy media, you'll know everything about the judge. But if the judge is a left-wing judge and it's a Biden appointee or Obama appointee, it's just a judge. And I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. It's becoming, I think legacy media is beyond repair. Am I right about that?
Yeah, of course. And, it goes far beyond just the bench. But there, you know, I was thinking about this today when I was watching the Kash Patel hearings and hearing all these Democrats from the dais talking about, you know, the weaponization of the FBI and what Kash Patel would do. And it's like they were asleep for the last 4 years. You know, even beyond the bench, all the institutions in this country that the left has weaponized over these years. And yeah, I mean, when they're talking about a left-wing judge or an FBI or a attorney or a you know, judge who's prosecuting Donald Trump or whatever, it's never the political implications, right? So there are just these two standards that go across all of our politics when it comes to the Democrats.
Now, I don't know Mr. Patel. His boss, his old boss at the National Security Council, Ambassador O'Brien's a very dear friend of mine. He says great things about Kash Patel, but I've never met him. I read yesterday the Wall Street Journal, maybe it was late last night, the Wall Street Journal profile of Kash Patel, which dropped, it's just a smear bucket. It's an absolute slime balling from Ghostbusters. We know the clubs he attends in Las Vegas, and there's an implication of impropriety in his jobs that he's got. There's nothing there, but it's a smear bucket, and I'm kind of shocked the Wall Street Journal ran with that. Do you know Kash Patel? I mean, what's this all about?
Well, He's been on the show. You know, I don't know him super well, but what I do know is he's got a record, a bipartisan record, I would mention, of service. He worked in the Obama administration. This is a guy, you know, who's done the job. And what I love about Kash is, you know, back when the Democrats were pushing all the Russiagate hoax nonsense, you know, he had, you know, both the experience and the will, frankly, to do what a lot of people wouldn't do. And that is more than just read the headlines, go back and actually, I don't know, investigate the investigators and see what are some of the premises they're relying on to formulate this opinion that Donald Trump is a Putin puppet. He's just a really smart guy. And, you know, I think if there's any institution, any broken institution in Washington that needs to be turned upside down, it's the FBI. You know, I mean, what Jim Comey did to Donald Trump when he was president-elect, going to Trump Tower and bringing that dossier that was Hillary Clinton's opposition research to the president-elect and accusing him of all these things just so he could initiate, you know, this probe into Russiagate. I mean, it's such a disservice to the American people and to the president-elect at the time to do that sort of thing. And it took the FBI off its mission of just catching the criminals. And if we could get back to that, it would be so great.
I think he's going to be a good director. I'm open to the fact that maybe he won't be, but what O'Brien told me is he's very smart. He's been cleared at the very highest levels. So that means he's had full field FBI background investigations at least twice. And he was a public defender, and he did work in the Obama administration. I hope you guys are all over those hearings, because if there's one person, I really want Pam Bondi confirmed in a hurry, but I also want Kash Patel confirmed in a hurry. Do you think he will be?
I do. And I hope, you know, Pam Bondi and all of these nominees, you know, deserve a fair shake here in these committee hearings. What's most striking to me, you know, obviously Donald Trump's election, you know, he is change, and these are his change agents, right? And the thing that's really bizarre about all of these confirmation hearings is they're getting attacked and criticized for, you know, past statements or what have you. And it's like, who's defending the status quo in these places?
They are.
Exactly?
They are.
Why aren't we talking more about that? You know?
We should be, but the witnesses and the nominees don't get to ask questions back. Michael Duncan of the Ruthless Podcast. I'll be looking forward to tomorrow's edition. And everyone, you should like and subscribe to the Ruthless Podcast. It's the real deal from professionals who know what they're talking about. The aftermath of the disaster in Washington, D.C. The world goes on, and two things going on today on the Hill. The confirmation hearing for Kash Patel to lead the FBI. Of course, he will answer to Pam Bondi as the Attorney General, so he's not leading it independent. That's an important thing to note. The FBI is part of the Department of Justice. And the confirmation hearing of Tulsi Gabbard to be the DNI, Director of National Intelligence. I want to get to Kash Patel and Dick Durbin, cut number 6.
38 criminal convictions, 38. He'd been sentenced to 14 years in prison. He was released because of the president's unconditional clemency, which was given to him as well. So I guess my question is this. Was President Donald Trump wrong to give blanket clemency to the January 6 defendants?
Thank you, Ranking Member. A couple of things on that. One, the power of the presidential pardon is just that, the president.
Well, I admit, I concede he has the authority. I'm asking, was he wrong to do it?
And as we discussed in our private meeting, Senator, I have always rejected any violence against law enforcement, and I have, including in that group, specifically addressed any violence against law enforcement on January 6th, and I do not agree with the commutation of any sentence of any individual who committed violence against law enforcement.
So do you think that America is safer because the 1,600 people have been given an opportunity to come out of serving their sentences and live in our communities again?
Senator, I have not looked at all 1,600 individual cases. I have always advocated for imprisoning those that cause harm to our law enforcement and civilian communities. I also believe America is not safer because President Biden's commutation of a man who murdered 2 FBI agents, Agent Kohlers and Williams' family, deserve better than to have the man that point blank range fired a shotgun into their heads and murdered them released from prison. So it goes both ways.
Leonard Pelletier was in prison for 45 years. He's 80 years old, and he was sentenced to home confinement. So he's not free, as you might have just suggested.
He killed 2 FBI agents.
That's true, he did, and he went to prison for it and should have.
I think Kash Patel won that round. How about with Amy Klobuchar? Cut number 7.
Did you say that the FBI headquarters should be shut down and reopened as a museum of the deep state?
Mr. Chairman, are we allowed to go an extra time?
Let's see. You get a second round. Before I call on Senator Lee.
Could he just answer the question if he said that the FBI headquarters, where they investigate cybercrime and terrorism, should be shut down and opened as a deep state?
Hey, Mr. Chair.
As a museum. Did he say that the headquarters should be shut down?
Mr. Chair.
I deserve an answer to that question. He is asking to be head of the FBI, and he said that their headquarters should be shut down.
Mr. Chair, parliamentary inquiry.
You got anything you want to say, Mr. Patel, before I go on to Senator Lee?
Simply this. If the best attacks on me are going to be false accusations and grotesque mischaracterizations, the only thing this body is doing is defeating the credibility of the men and women at the FBI. I stood with them here in this country. In every theater of war we have, I was on the ground in service of this nation. And any accusations leveled against me that I would somehow put political bias before the Constitution are grotesquely unfair. And I will have you reminded that I have been endorsed by over 300,000 law enforcement officers to become the next director of the FBI. Let's ask them.
You know, the attempt to box in very intelligent people by not so swift senators is never edifying, but often amusing. That was amusing. What's not amusing is we get old and we still have to put up with aches and pains. I'm older today than I was yesterday. I took my relief factor yesterday, got up the implacable. Didn't run today, just strode up because of a long conversation with Fidelity Investments that I will tell you about tomorrow. I have no problems. I have frustrations with big, impersonal, ridiculous investment companies that I believe are actively engaged in attempting to scare people. And sometimes if they get a senior who might have less than 100% mental competence, or that's not me, I'm all here, or less than perfect hearing, and that's not me, I'm all here. Josh Kraushaar is editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Josh, I want to get to the hostage release today in Israel, but before that, first, thank you for very objective posting last night. You did not engage in engagement farming. You were just doing your best to give us updates from, I believe, local news, and I thought you did a fine job of that. Thank you. Now, I want to read you a post that came via Charlie Kirk, quoting a New York Times story, which I've reposted on my account. Staffing was, quote, not normal, close quote, at Airport Tower, according to a preliminary FAA report. Staffing at the air traffic control tower at Ronald Reagan National Airport was, quote, not normal for the time of day and volume of traffic, according to an internal preliminary Federal Aviation Administration safety report about the collision that was reviewed by the New York Times. The controller who was handling helicopters in the airport's vicinity Wednesday night was also instructing planes that were landing and departing from its runways. Those jobs typically are assigned to 2 controllers rather than 1. This increases the workload for the air traffic controller and can complicate the job. One reason is that controllers can use different radio frequencies to communicate with pilots flying planes and pilots flying helicopters. While the controller is communicating with pilots of the helicopter and the jet, the two sets of pilots may not be able to hear each other. What do you make of that? What's your reaction to that, Josh?
I think this is one of the most important developments in a day of many, many bits of new information about the crash. That there was a shortage, or one person in the flight in the control tower. The Washington National Airport, I fly into and out of that airport all the time. You can see the air traffic in that area, both regular passenger jets and the military helicopters. And sometimes you wonder, it's concerned lawmakers over the years that there's just a lot of traffic, not a lot of runway, and there's a lot worries about this very thing happening. The fact that you were, and I also was talking to a couple friends of mine who have worked at the FAA and know about sort of the policy. This is not something I cover regularly, but there has been a staffing shortage. This has been a challenge in terms of getting enough people to fill in some of these important jobs. And this goes back years, really the last 5-10 years. So, you have, I think, a combination of just certainly, as the New York Times report suggests, a staffing shortage at the worst possible time, probably some pilot error. We'll find out more about that. Donald Trump, President Trump, certainly indicated that there may have been an issue with the pilot of the military helicopter in his press conference today, but we'll probably learn more about that. But also just the general issue of all the traffic. And it sounds like there was I read another New York Times report this morning that at the last minute, the airplane was redirected. One of the runways it was supposed to land in on, they changed the runway at the last minute, and that also may have been a factor in what happened. But I do think staffing is going to be something that's looked at very carefully, and the fact that the air traffic control tower was short staffed at a very critical moment is pretty shocking.
Yeah, and it's actually astonishing, given that airport and who comes in and out of that airport. And as you know, and as I know, it's almost directly across from Joint Base Andrews. It's in a very heavily populated area. There are very tight corridors because of security concerns after 9/11. I'm just astonished that it happened, but I don't know who's responsible, and I don't know why. We'll find out. Now, Josh, I am wondering your reaction to the release of the octogenarian and two women, one an IDF soldier, one a civilian, as well as 4 or 5 Thai nationals today by the terrorists in Gaza, and the manner of the release, which I think is guaranteed to anger every Israeli because it angered me. What do you think?
Well, Hugh, it has. I mean, this is it's not the three Israeli hostages, 5 Thai hostages were released this morning in Israel, but the rules of the deal were not abided by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and all you have to do is look at some of the footage that they had these scared women being threatened and jeered as they're being handed over to the Red Cross. It's just hard to imagine. Anyone who thinks that Hamas is someone that can be a partner in these agreements, I think is delusional. The notion that they can actually, or they could end up still being in control of Gaza after this is all said and done with, I think that's going to be, we've talked about this, Hugh, that there's a lot of unanswered questions in the second and third phases of this deal. This is just, I think people don't realize this is over a month. The first phase is taking over a month to actually release the first wave of hostages, 33, not all of them alive. But then when we get to the future phases, it's going to be very tricky because it essentially allows for Hamas to remain in charge, and it prevents the Israeli military from doing what it needs to do to prevent Hamas's control of Gaza. So I think we've got tricky times to come. It's good news that we saw these 8 hostages released after over a year in captivity under the most horrific conditions. It is kind of alarming that that you don't hear from international human rights organizations. You never heard the names of these individuals and the brutal treatment that they went under, that we're learning about in captivity. But this is just the first step, and there's a long way to go.
Am I correct that the Israeli soul doesn't need any more iron, but boy, there's got to be iron in their teeth now, too. I think there is no chance of a phase two if Hamas continues to act this way, because it was brutalizing the brutalized during this escapade by Hamas today. People can't trust them. I don't know how we do not end up back at war. Do you?
Well, there was always, whether it's the Trump administration, and more so from the Biden administration before it, there's been, we hear this talk about a Palestinian state, and the Israelis, I mean, even the most peace-loving, progressive Israelis look at what happened on October 7th, and they look at the photos and the videos of the civilian population in Gaza. Not even the most hardened, Hamas militants, but terrorists but individuals who are, kidnapping. And some of the civilians ended up being involved in the kidnapping and taking these Israeli civilians and say the most vile things about Jews. I mean, you look at how depraved the culture is, the society is, and the notion of a state seems delusional. But that is what you hear from, certainly some elements, some European elements, but some parts of the American kind of diplomatic process that think that the way to end the problem is to give the Palestinians a state. And I don't think the Israelis would ever come to the table because of what they know is happening on the other side of the border.
They're not going to. I don't think we're going to get to phase two. I'm not an Israeli. There are Americans still held hostage. I hope they get out soon. But I'll tell you, that escapade today almost guarantees no phase two. Coming up next hour, I'll be joined by both Eli Lake of the Free Press, Seth Mandel of Commentary Magazine. I continue to keep an eye on unfolding events in Israel where 8 hostages were released today. 3 Israeli nationals, an octogenarian man, 2 women, one of whom was a civilian, one of whom was an IDF soldier. And we've been showing you clips of their release and the reunion of the soldier with her fellow soldiers with whom she was held in captivity but not released, as Hamas continues to do everything they can to make this deal fall apart. There were 4 different terrorist organizations involved in a chaotic handover today that was just simply unacceptable on any civilized scale, and I'll talk to Eli about that. Also want to tell you that I'll be playing President Trump's presser in hour 3 today when I have no guests. I want you to be able to hear it uninterrupted on the air. I also want to tell you, I mentioned Fidelity. And if you have an account with Fidelity, especially if you're a senior with an account at Fidelity, especially if you have hearing difficulty, I want you to listen tomorrow. I have no problems, all right? Took care of my problem today after an hour and a half on the phone with a fine youngster who just couldn't make the system work because I'll explain it all tomorrow, but I have no problems. That is an irritation. Fidelity, I will never do business with again, and I don't think anyone should. I think you should just absolutely get out of there because it's a nightmare. And don't open up an account, go somewhere else, go to Stiefel, go somewhere else, get out of Fidelity when you can. It's a nightmare. I'll explain it to you tomorrow. But I'm a lawyer and a journalist, and I got all my marbles, and I'm pretty good at this, and I don't lose my temper easily. I didn't lose my temper today. I was quite firm in communicating to Fidelity. They have really screwed up by screwing around with me, and it's over $68. I can't even believe I'm telling you that. It's just a preview of coming attractions. But compared to people who lost loved ones and friends, people got out of captivity, I have no problems. Most of you don't have any, but you're stuck in traffic somewhere. That's not a problem, it's an irritation. The problem is a matter of health or life of you and your family. People most traumatized today, of course, are the family members and the loved ones and the close friends of the people who died in Washington, D.C., and other people who have lost loved ones in accidents who will, of course, be reliving the moment they got that news. Very aware of that. And the ghouls on X last night. Ghouls. Engagement farming ghouls. Shame. Those of you who apologized, I saw it, and not to me, but to the families and the victims. You actually apologized for politicizing a tragedy. Good for you. Perhaps you won't do it in the future, but some of you are still out there trying to make a political event out of a tragedy that early reports now suggest probably had its problem in the Federal Aviation Air Traffic Control Tower at Washington's Reagan National Airport, UCA. It's dark day in the nation's capital as the aftermath of the collision between an American Airlines jet and a Black Hawk helicopter continues to be under investigation. The preliminary FAA report leaked to the New York Times suggests that staffing was off at the air traffic control tower at Reagan National. Joining me now is Eli Lake. Eli is with the Free Press. He is also the host of the Breaking History podcast, longtime friend of mine and of the program, and like me has probably been in and out of National 1,000 times and horrified by this. Eli, before we go to the hostage release, I want people to know about Breaking History, your thoughts on the coverage of this last night. There were ghouls out on X trying to score political points last night.
I mean, let's find out what happened first and foremost. It's a terrible, terrible thing, and there will be plenty of time for blame to go around, but I just think the speculation at this point as to who to blame for something this catastrophic is, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's ghoulish.
All right, let me move on to another ghoulish thing. There was a hostage release today in Israel, and I was hopeful until I saw what they actually did. There were 4 different terrorist groups involved in the release of either the octogenarian or the 2 women soldiers, and it looked like the mob was going to take them. What do you think this does to the Israeli soul? I just think it dooms phase 2.
Oh, it dooms phase 2. I think there's a deeper point. I want to go back to a comment that Mike Huckabee, the nominee to be the ambassador to Israel, said. He was asked what his views on a Palestinian state was. And this is before we've seen these propaganda videos of these releases. And he said there was a Palestinian state. It was called Gaza, and that didn't work out very well. I don't think people quite understand that this kind of gloating, this kind of psychological propaganda is going to delay any talk of a 2-state solution for another generation. I think October 7th did that already. But, for the Palestinians then to turn around and claim to be victims when it's, yes, this is Hamas, but it's not just Hamas. As we saw on October 7th, there was another wave that came in that invaded those kibbutzim, and they were just, the people of Gaza. And that is the result of generations of a kind of brainwashing agenda that I think makes it impossible for any sane person to talk about a Palestinian state, which I think you and I have been accustomed to hearing talk about that since the 1990s through the Oslo process. And we have to recognize that this is over for the time being. You cannot give that kind of situation, that society that produces these kinds of propaganda plays, a state. You can't expect any country to want to be a neighbor to that. So
not only
at
that,
this point,
I'm going to go further.
Yeah.
I think Netanyahu and the government will have to resume the war after as many hostages as they deem possible to release have been released. Because I don't know Joe Truzman. He's over at FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracy. I trust that he's good because he's at FDD. He writes, 4 different terrorist organizations participated in the chaotic transfer of Arbel Yehud today. Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Popular Resistance Committee, the Palestinian Mujahideen movement. All right, I don't know how Israel can not go back to war as soon as they've decided they've got as many hostages out as possible. Do you?
Listen, the one thing I do think is important is that you have to take a look at the larger regional picture. There's a window right now in Iran to take out their nuclear sites when the state itself no longer has a viable air defense because of Israel, and they no longer have the proxy ability to rain rockets the way they could before through Hezbollah. So in that respect, that I think is the biggest piece on the chessboard. And my hope is that Donald Trump will do what Joe Biden was unwilling to do, which is to provide Israel with whatever kind of support it needs to get this job done, because that's not just in Israel's interest. That's in America's interest. That's in Europe's interest. That is in the interest of the moderate Sunni Gulf kingdoms. I mean, this is what needs to be done. And there is a window now. I don't know how long that's going to be open. And I think that that's got to be the number one priority. But at the end of the day, Hamas cannot exist if Israel is going to live in security. So that has to also be kind of on the agenda.
Now, the chief terrorist of the terrorists is Ayatollah Khamenei. And there are reports he's dialed in all of his proxies and said, let's lay low for a while, for the reason you just discussed, Eli. And I don't know what's going to happen. I think Secretary Hegseth, Secretary Rubio, National Security Advisor Walls are very good on Israel. I think President Trump's very good on Israel. I have heard concerns about Mr. Witkoff, whom I don't know anything about, and I've heard concerns about some lower-level appointees at the Department of Defense. What are those concerns?
Well, the concern with Mr. Witkoff is he's made some inopportune comments. He has praised Qatar. Qatar is the one Gulf state that has decided to cast their lot with the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood and has been basically a supporter of Hamas, and at the same time acting as if they're the negotiator. So they're the arsonist and the firefighter in that regard. And Witkoff has said that they were wonderful. And also what Witkoff did is when he went over to negotiate this hostage deal in the 3 phases, he basically took kind of what was on the shelf from Antony Blinken and the Biden administration and then said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I think that, that deal is sort of in and of itself bad for Israel. So those are the knocks against Witkoff. I'm concerned that there is sort of an undercurrent within the administration that is trying to put people at the middle levels. I wrote about this earlier this week, that are of this kind of, neo-libertarian, they call themselves the restrainers. And while you're not going to have them at the senior levels, the cabinet level, as like a Rubio or a Hegseth or a Steve Wall, I agree with you that they're terrific. Mike Waltz is terrific. They are there in an implementing kind of phase, and we could see problems. I mean, you're a longtime Washingtonian. These are the deputy assistant secretaries of defense, people like that. So I'm worried that this view, what might be, sort of associated maybe with a Tucker Carlson worldview, is going to have its sort of say and could potentially shape things. And I have to say that I think Tulsi Gabbard, as the director of national intelligence, if she gets through, we'll see. I saw her hearing today. Certainly doesn't come from the side of the fence of a Rubio or a Walls either.
But when you hear a Tom Cotton, who is as good a friend as Israel has ever had, say, agreed. I know Tulsi. I don't know Tulsi Gabbard. I've never had on the show. She's a Democrat. Yeah. Why would I know her? Democrats are welcome here, but most of those who accept, like Angus King or Josh Shapiro or Ro Khanna, are really smart, and they're looking to engage. I'm not worried, Eli. In fact, I'm worried about you overreacting a little bit, because if I'm going to run a big tent administration like Reagan did, I want every part of the party in. I want to hear them, and I want to decide what's best. And I don't think they're isolationists, and I don't think you're a neocon warmonger. All the labels. Fair. It's never true, right? Everyone is much more complicated than they're made out to be.
Yes, but I think in the case of Tulsi Gabbard, there are certain things that I admire about Tulsi Gabbard. I have certainly moved my views of the FBI and the national intelligence community and the larger national security state just by covering Russiagate and covering, the Hunter Biden stuff. So there's reason we need reform, and maybe she will be part of that. But this is also somebody, who in, I think it's 2017, decided to travel to Syria and had a meeting with Bashar al-Assad.
Very disturbing. Very disturbing.
Yes. And so things like that, I'm just saying, are question of judgment. And I think that you would disagree with her past praise of Edward Snowden. I'm all for, as a journalist, I'm all for leaks, but that was like
a traitor.
That was a mega leak. Right, there you go. So I'm just saying that it's not the end of the world. I agree with you that it doesn't mean that I don't have, high hopes, I guess you could say, for a Trump administration, particularly in compared to what we just had with the Biden administration. So you and I are in agreement on that. I just feel as a journalist, it is important to sort of note these trends, and I'm not, it's not coming out of my head. I'm getting it from people who are alarmed at this point, but we'll see.
Now, I hope. How long do I have you for, Eli? Can I keep you through the break and to the end of the year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure we talk. In fact, let's talk about it right now. The new Breaking History podcast. They've broken you out of the Free Press Honestly podcast where you used to live. You show up occasionally on the Commentary podcast. Now you got your own. So what is Breaking History? We got 30 seconds. We'll go to break. We'll come back after break and expand on it.
It's my effort to offer an intelligent but accessible 40-minute or so podcast that explains something that's in the news right now through the lens of an historical event, a movement, a personality. And we can talk a little bit more after the break.
Okay, great. Get ready to tell me about the latest episode to illustrate this.
Absolutely.
I've known Eli for 15 or 20 years, one of the best reporters in Washington, D.C. He's now at the Free Press, one of the best new media. I'm old media. Old new media is what I am. There's legacy media, old new media, and new media, and we're both in the latter two. As I often say, there are three buckets of media. There's legacy media, and by that I mean ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. Used to be the LA Times, but it's a shell. Then there's old new media, which includes talk radio as pioneered by Rush, and I've been doing it since 1990, and the Fox News Channel, which launched in 1996, old new media. And now there's new media, stuff like the Free Press, which I subscribe to, and one of its contributors, Eli Lake, who's a longtime journalist who used to work in legacy media, now he's in new media, old new media, and new media with this podcast, Breaking History. Tell us about Breaking History, Eli.
Well, as I said, it is an effort to try to provide historical context to the news. So we usually lead with a news event, and then we try to kind of do a dive into something that has happened in the past that helps illuminate it. So our debut episode was about Trump's inauguration, as I see it, a great American populist moment, and he ran as a populist. And so I did a show that looked at the first populist president, Andrew Jackson, who, as I'm sure appreciate, is a fascinating and extremely consequential figure in American history. And while there are certainly differences between Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump, there are so many similarities, and that's really the joy of doing the research for the show. I love reading history, and I try to sort of bring that my enthusiasm for the subject to the listener, and to do it in a way that isn't intimidating and doesn't require you to sort of put aside 3 hours or 5 hours or something like that. It's just an easy 35 to 40 minute show that hopefully you come out of it and you're saying, wow, I hadn't thought of that before, and makes you want more.
Interesting. Everything I know about or remember about Andrew Jackson is probably from John Meacham's American Lion.
Yes, great
and
book.
the Jackson portrait is back in the Oval, so it's certainly timely. I'm curious. Yeah. Did you touch on William Jennings Bryan because he's really one of our first populists, or do you just do one of them?
Well, I lead it with a discussion of what populism is, which I'm relying on the historian Michael Kazin's book for this, which was like now, oh my God, almost 30 years old. In which, but Kazin kind of came up with this theory that populism was more of a kind of mood. It was almost a political grammar. It was whenever you decided to sort of frame your movement as the people versus an elite of some kind. I didn't get into William Jennings Bryan because it's a bit complicated to explain. I had a draft of it where I did, but I talk about Huey Long, I talk about George Wallace, I talk about Ross Perot in the beginning to kind of give a sense that we've always had a kind of populist energy in America, and that while too much populism can be a very bad thing, Hugh, I think that populism in moderation is an excellent thing, because what it does is it accommodates a very natural kind of American spirit to say, I don't like the way these elites are running things, without entirely disrupting the system. And that is a remarkable thing for a country that was founded in revolution. So I say that populism in the end is a little bit like an escape valve. And I think that the election of Donald Trump, if you think about the alternative, might be getting us out of that cycle where both parties challenge the legitimacy of elections, and in some ways is kind of let's give the critics their due. And that is, I think, a healthy thing, because I don't think that it's going to signal a 500-year reign of Trumpism or MAGA. No, that's not how America works. And Jackson had 12 good years, his own 2 terms, and then Martin Van Buren. And then the Whigs got it together, and they won an election. So that's...
Eli, I want to go back further. Our framers, particularly Hamilton, knew Plutarch. The first populist is Gaius Marius. The first anti-populist is Sulla, and then Caesar's a
actually,
populist.
I would argue the first populist is Tiberius Gracchus.
You're right, but I'm not. That's really outside of my scope. I know Plutarch, and there are 2 Gracchi, so they're both populists.
Right.
But it's they were aware of this, right? They knew the countryside versus the capital was a real deal. I think they planned for it.
I think they did. It is the genius of our founders, and that's the part of it which I like about populism. The bad part about populism is that sometimes you will get figures who will be prone to conspiracy theories, and they will not be able to discern between kind of corrupted institutions and real expertise, and that could be a problem in a country. So it's not all good or bad, but I'm inclined to think that there is something really beneficial, because I do think if Trump had lost the election, then he was announced to have lost the election, he would have a very legitimate grievance to say, you waged these ridiculous lawfare against me. I was gagged by Juan Merchan in the Alvin Bragg suit, which was meritless, and you warped the justice system in a way to sort of become a partisan weapon. And in my view, that would have been a fairly legitimate point, and who knows where we would have been, and it really could have been a much bigger crisis. So in some ways, I think it was very good for the country that Trump won.
Last question in this regard. Kash Patel has been assailed today. I don't know Kash Patel, but Robert O'Brien, who is one of my closest friends, says he's very smart, he's very loyal, very patriotic, very good at his job, and he's been assailed as almost a threat, hysterically, by Amy Klobuchar at one point. I mean, do you worry about? I don't worry about Kash Patel. There are laws. There are courts. The FBI is not neutral. The FBI management has gone to the left and part of the weaponization, and they need reform, but not radical demolition.
I think the FBI needs reform, and my hope is that Kash Patel will surround himself with the people who can accomplish reform effectively. Because I think if he leaves himself open and takes wild swings as the FBI director, if he gets through, and I think he will get through, by the way, well then, he will actually be depriving the institution of the reform it does desperately need, which unfortunately Chris Wray has not been able to accomplish after the Comey era, which I think really was pretty bad. And I have to say that I have not watched that hearing, so I want to reserve judgment. But when I wrote about it before, I do think that there were, including the names of people in the appendix of his book, was intemperate. I don't necessarily think that would be an enemies list, but I do think it left himself open. And I think it would be, you can't have an FBI director who is announcing a kind of his personal grudges. But again, this is one of the things I love about history, Hugh. We've been there before. Bobby Kennedy had a personal grudge against Jimmy Hoffa, and he warped the IRS and the Justice Department and created his own shadow FBI just to go after Hoffa and his associates.
And I like to point out to people, my first boss of big consequence, Richard Nixon, I was out in San Clemente in 1970. He was afraid of Hoover. I mean, there's a problem with the Bureau. If Nixon is afraid of a guy, that means that guy's got too much power. And Comey had too much power.
Another time we should talk about when I'm increasingly of the view that there's like this alternative theory of Watergate, which is actually, it was a kind of deep state coup. I'm not entirely on board with that, but I think there's a lot more merit to that.
Go watch Jeff Shepard's documentary at salemnow.com. Jeff is the expert on Watergate, and I think you're right. We'll do that another time. I'm going to enjoy Breaking History, Eli. Keep coming back. I'll talk to you at least monthly, and I'll start listening to Breaking History on the Long Trundles. Breaking History is part of the Free Press. You ought to subscribe to the Free Press, part of the new media, of which old new media, Eli Lake and Hugh Hewitt, are very fond. I don't work for the Free Press. Eli does, but I'm very fond of it. Markets are closed after a very difficult day in America as it becomes nighttime in the East, growing close to the end of the workday. Markets shut down half hour ago. And AmericanFederal.com is one of my sponsors. They sponsor the market report every afternoon. And they buy and sell gold, and they buy and sell silver. And you can call them at 1-800-221-7694. Now, if you did what I did and bought gold in January, you're happy because gold went up to $2,849 an ounce today. And that's a big jump. I think that's like $80 day over day. I'm not sure. And I bought the gold 3 weeks ago. And in those 3 weeks, it's been nothing but up. And that doesn't mean I'm going to go out and sell it or I'm going to go out and buy more. I actually do dollar cost averaging on everything. So you don't make sudden big lurches into this and sudden sales of that. There are day traders out there. God bless you all. You make a lot of money, but I don't think you will. It's gambling. But I do diversify, and I know that over the past 100 years, gold more than kept up with inflation. So we put that in the safety deposit box and forget about it. And it'll be there, I hope, when the estate is distributed, and it's easy to cut into threes, and I have 3 children. And when the second of us go to heaven, fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I, they can just divide it up into threes. I hope I never have to sell it. It's runaway money. It's against financial collapse money. It's just sort of insurance policy, and it keeps pace with inflation. But today, the market went up all across the board. I don't know why. I never know why. That's not my stuff. I know about politics. I know about history, but I don't know about markets and trading. I know that the DeepSeek app shuttered Wall Street on Monday. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, it came back, or maybe it shuttered the market on Tuesday, and on Wednesday and Thursday, it came back. I can't quite remember. But the Dow was up 0.38% today, and the S&P 500 was up 0.5%, and the NASDAQ was up 0.25%, and gold was up 2%. So you'd rather own gold today than any of those 3 indexes, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing you want to own. You want to talk about a gold strategy, call up Nick Grovich. He founded American Federal 44 years ago. Maybe I'm off by 2 years, one way or the other. But Nick is a pro. He is transparent. He is honest. He is straightforward. And if you want to buy gold, whether Krugerrands or American Eagles or whatever he's got lying around, he might have Canadian maple leaves, although that will soon be an American currency, right? I'm joking. We're not going to take Canada. Sorry, Ross. Sorry, Aaron. But whatever you want to buy, do it with Nick. Tell him Hugh sent you. 1-800-221-7694, or head over to AmericanFederal.com. Coming up, Seth Mandel of Commentary, because I got to talk about this. I'm really excited about this hostage deal. And then next hour, I got to play the whole Donald Trump 17-minute exchange, so you get it all at once. But let's listen to Tom Tillis on the Senate Judiciary Committee today during the hearing of Kash Patel, cut number 9.
Colleagues, I created a cash bingo card that I have available to any of my colleagues who would like it on the other side of the aisle. Some may view this as an unserious caricature and not appropriate for this committee. Sadly, I consider it a serious caricature of what I expect to be witnessed today. I think we'll have words like enemies list and deep state. I've already X'd out 4 boxes in the opening statements alone. The fact of the matter is, some people will be here to simply substantiate a false narrative.
Good for Tom Tillis. Hey, you North Carolina voters, get involved in this campaign right now. Help him out, contribute, find it. THOM. Remember, it's Tom Tillis, THOM Tillis. That's funny. John Kennedy's on this committee, too. Senator Kennedy, cut number 8.
Before we go to leave...
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, what do you want?
I love this guy. Mr. Chairman, I'm unlike Senator Tillis. I mean, if we're going to start this, I want an extra 3 minutes.
Well,
now, my friend Senator Klobuchar went 3 minutes over.
So, here what you're saying is the chairman wasn't a very good chairman by not shutting her up. But I've gone through this before, and I think I know how to handle it and get
I
this
think
done.
I think you're a star-spangled awesome chairman. I just want to say that for the record. But if you're going to let somebody over there go 3 minutes over, I want my extra 3 minutes.
Well, let's see if it's abused by anybody else before we make that decision.
I'm just telling you, I'm going to abuse it.
Well, I'm not going to let you abuse it.
Yeah, if you're having a joke of the Democrats doing narrative idiocy, then make a joke of it. Way to go, Senator Kennedy. Way to go, Senator Tillis. Each week I have Bethany Mandel on the program. I always talk to her about her husband behind his back because Seth Mandel's in my ear almost every morning. Seth Mandel is one of the contributors to Commentary Magazine podcast. This is one of the few days, Seth, I did not listen since I had to spend 90 minutes on the phone with Fidelity trying to close an old account, 19 years old, with $68 in it. And I have no problems. I'm not involved in a disaster in D.C., but I nevertheless didn't get to your commentary. So if you said something particularly brilliant and witty today, I missed it. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good.
My wife is a very tough act to follow, especially because I'm going to follow her, 150 acts or whatever she's been on so far. So we'll see what we can do.
You are. First of all, I need to settle an old score with you. You recommended Tires on commentary. You love Tires. So I went to my wife of 42 years and said, Seth Mandel loves this Cheyenne Gillis show, Tires. Let's watch it. And at the end, she wasn't talking at me. What's the matter with you, Seth? You got to give a PG-13.
She's talking to you now, right?
Yeah, now. Yeah, she's not talking to me. What? Are you still watching Tires?
I was hoping that you would forget about that.
No. You don't know my wife. You don't know how she can remember
When we recommend stuff on commentary, we always say, if there's language or, mature content or something, which that show had. So I think we warned about that.
Oh, I encourage you to go back and listen. You did not.
No.
So now, Seth, I want to ask you about something completely serious. Yeah, you and Bethany have 6 children. What do you do after a disaster in your backyard as awful as yesterday's about what they see and how you tell them?
Well, one of the things that's different in this day and age is that we don't have a television necessarily on with news or anything running in the background because it's the age of streaming. And my kids are homeschooled, so they aren't necessarily confronted with everything that happens as it happens. But we do talk to them about it, and it depends on the kid. They range in ages, and they also range in fears. We have kids who, would be a bit more afraid to fly next time if they, if we played for them that Kennedy Center live stream video, right, the one that caught the crash and the fireball, and we have others who wouldn't be affected by it. So yeah, it really depends on the kid. We get a chance to actually make those calls almost kid by kid because of the fact that they're not in school and they're not, this is when the Challenger thing happened and they rolled in the TV for everybody to watch. And then you had to send all the kids home wondering what on earth was going on. And all that
the
stuff.
challenge, Seth, is I really don't. This is not my problem because my kids are grown and my grandchildren are their problems or their opportunities. And I just know that they go to good schools where some children are not equipped with technology, and so they will have seen this when they come home. I have no idea how it will impact them. But if you send a child to a school today, they're going to see this, right? If they go to a school.
I think so. I assume so.
It's to me a great challenge of parenting. Another challenge for Jewish parents, and you are, is that video of this morning's hostage release. And I don't know, it enrages me when they mobbed the car with the people who've been traumatized and held captive for 15 months. What did it do to you?
No, it was the same. I wrote a post up at commentarymagazine.com, commentary.org. I should get the fact that we changed our website correctly. I wrote a post up at Commentary today about exactly that, about the emotions that you go through and the stages, and that the hostage releases are supposed to be relief. That's the main emotion you're expecting to feel, and maybe some joy, although it's tempered by everything that's going on around you. But today's was a whole host of emotions before you got a chance to feel relief, and one of them, was anger, fury, rage, whatever you want to call it, as they didn't just mob the cars, the Red Cross vehicles that the hostages were in to be taken out of Gaza, and they mobbed them on their way to the cars, and the crowd was wild-eyed and jeering and threatening and gesticulating, and in some cases reaching for the hostages. One of the hostages today was an 80-year-old man. So none of this is expected to be easy for him, although he made it kind of look easy as he was about to get into the Red Cross van. He gave a classic Israeli smirk that lit up everybody at home, because old Jewish farmers are pretty hard to keep down. But yeah, for the most part, it was a threatening atmosphere, and I don't think it was a safe atmosphere also, which is the other point to make, which is that you don't know what happened. You don't know who's really got control of those crowds, or if anybody does, and you don't know what might happen. They're close enough to them, and they're all squeezed together. Anything could happen. Somebody could trip and fall. They could have trouble getting the cars out of there. I mean, it's a genuinely dangerous situation, and it feels like the release. They're not released until they force them to run this last gauntlet. And in one case, that meant having the captive do this sort of play on a stage where she holds up the certificate as if she graduated, from grade school, and wave to the crowd. And there's a Hamas guy standing a few feet back going like this when she has to wave. And so she looks up and, knows when to mimic the wave and stuff like that. So it's a combination of humiliation and genuine danger. And it was so upsetting that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually said to them, the Palestinian inmates that we're sending back, they're going to wait on the bus for a few more minutes until we can get some assurances that the hostages are going to be treated with respect.
Seth, I'm not a Jew. I'm not an Israeli. I support the state of Israel for a whole variety of reasons that history...
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect. I'm sorry. But you know what? My wife is 1/8 Jewish. Does that count? Anyway, the fact of the matter is, I don't think we're going to get to phase 2. I don't know that the Israelis will even allow it. I think there's going to be a big swing after this nightmarish release, that the whole life before dignity, before reputation is going to go away because these people are crazy. What do you think?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, it always felt it's always going to be precarious, the ceasefire deal. But it feels like it has picked up some real momentum of late. And I think it's changing the calculus a little, at least. The truth is that we've gotten more hostages released because of some misunderstandings and some hiccups along the way that have been made up by Hamas's side. We actually have more hostages than we were planning to have had returned by this time already. So there is a certain amount of momentum actually to this particular ceasefire. And we expect this weekend, probably to see Keith Siegel, an American, released. And so I don't know, initially it was very easy to be skeptical of anything that's supposed to start 42 days after an agreement is made, right? As the second wave is technically, day 42 or day 43. But you have to admit that when they've had hiccups so far, they've found a way to smooth them out, get around them, and keep moving in ways that have, again, not really delayed things, and in some cases, maybe sort of made up for those delays. I mean, it just feels like it's rolling on a certain, it has a certain amount of momentum at this point. But they have to, everything's subject to negotiations. So
that's it. And Seth, I'll continue to be updated because of the Commentary Podcast every day. Thank your colleagues for me, and I'll talk to you again soon. Say hello to the wonderful Bethany. I'll be right back, America.
Thanks, you.
I told you earlier in the program I took my Relief Factor earlier. There's the bag, and I take it every day. I take it on the air, usually after I've done my miles. I did not trundle today. I was just walking because I was on the phone for an hour and a half with a Fidelity representative over a $68 account that was 19 years old. I kid you not. I'll tell you the story tomorrow. But that's not a problem. On a day of tragedy, it puts into perspective the irritations that we all go through. Irritations are not problems. Problems are not tragedies. There's a hierarchy of difficulty, irritations, problems, tragedy. And I'm blessed not to have had a tragedy today or even a real problem. I had an irritation. I'll tell you about it tomorrow after I'm very, very cool. Just to warn you, never go near Fidelity. Ever. Ever. Get far away from it. Now, I do want to play for you Senator Cotton talking about Tulsi Gabbard, since I referenced it earlier this hour when talking with Eli Lake. Here's Senator Cotton at the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing on Tulsi Gabbard, cut number 14.
I'm dismayed by the attacks on Ms. Gabbard's patriotism and her loyalty to our country. For instance, Hillary Clinton has smeared Ms. Gabbard, calling her an asset of a foreign nation. Let me remind everyone that Ms. Gabbard has served in our Army for more than 2 decades. She has multiple combat tours, and she still wears the uniform to this day.
All right, that's all I wanted
you to hear.
I wanted you to hear that because Tulsi Gabbard gets her day, and Tom Cotton is supporting her. And I have over my shoulder Tom Cotton's new book, which is 7 Things You Can't Say About China. And it's a must-read. You dummies who downloaded DeepSeek, you dummies. It's just another spy in your house. You got TikTok and DeepSeek competing to get your info. Get it off your phone. On a dark day in our nation's capital in the aftermath of the death of 67 people in a midair collision between a American Airlines jet from Wichita, Kansas, and a United States Army Black Hawk helicopter. We don't know any cause. We have leaks to the New York Times that are pointing to a lack of capacity in the tower, that one air traffic controller was doing the work of 2 air traffic controllers. But I don't know if that's true. New York Times, I don't know if that's true or complete. And we don't know why that staffing shortage would exist, and we cannot absolve either crew yet. We don't know anything. But the President of the United States came out today and gave 17 minutes of remarks, which I'm going to make sure you hear everything he said. There's controversy about his exchanges afterwards, but let's begin at the start. President Trump on a morning of mourning in Washington, D.C., cut number 1.
Thank you very much. I speak to you this morning in an hour of anguish for our nation. Just before 9 p.m. last night, an American Airlines regional jet carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter carrying 3 military service members over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., while on final approach to Reagan National Airport. Both aircraft crashed instantly and were immediately submerged into the icy waters of the Potomac. Real tragedy. The massive search and rescue mission was underway throughout the night, leveraging every asset at our disposal, and I have to say the local, state, federal, military, including the United States Coast Guard in particular, they've done a phenomenal job. So quick, so fast, it was mobilized immediately. The work has now shifted to a recovery mission. Sadly, there are no survivors. This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly, and we are a country of really, we are in mourning. This is really shaken a lot of people, including people, very sadly, from other nations who were on the flight. For the family members back in Wichita, Kansas, here in Washington, D.C., and throughout the United States and in Russia, we have a Russia contingent, some very talented people. Unfortunately, were on that plane. Very, very, very sorry about that. Whose loved ones were aboard the passenger jet. We can only begin to imagine the agony that you're all feeling. Nothing worse. On behalf of the First Lady, myself, and 340 million Americans, our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now and in the days to come. We'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come. We're here for you to wipe away the tears and to offer you our devotion, our love, and our support. There's great support. In moments like this, the Differences between Americans fade to nothing compared to the bonds of affection and loyalty that unite us all, both as Americans and even as nations. We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers. That icy Potomac, it was a cold, cold night, cold water. We're all overcome with the grief for many who have so tragically perished, will no longer be with us. Together we take solace in the knowledge that their journey ended not in the cold waters of the Potomac, but in the warm embrace of a loving God. We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now. Because over the years I've watched as things like this happen, and they say, well, we're always investigating, and then the investigation 3 years later, they announce it. We think we have some pretty good ideas. But we'll find out how this disaster occurred, and we'll ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. The FAA and the NTSB and the U.S. military will be carrying out a systematic and comprehensive investigation. Our new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, his second day on the job when that happened. It's a rough one. We'll be working tirelessly. He's a great gentleman. The whole group these are great people, and they are working tirelessly to figure out exactly what happened. We will state certain opinions, however. I'm also immediately appointing an acting commissioner to the FAA, Christopher Rocheleau, a 22-year veteran of the agency, highly respected. Christopher, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence, and we didn't really have that, and we had it. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. Their policy was horrible, and their politics was even worse. So as you know, last week, long before the crash, I signed an executive order restoring our highest standards for air traffic controllers and other important jobs throughout the country. So it was very interesting. About a week ago, almost upon entering office, I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers and others, by the way. Then my administration will set the highest possible bar for aviation safety. We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent, the word talent. They have to be talented, naturally talented geniuses. You can't have regular people doing that job. They won't be able to do it. But we'll restore faith in American air travel. I'll have more to say about that. I do want to point out that various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them, they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. This was in January 14th, so that was a week before I entered office. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? These are people that are, I mean, actually, their lives are shortened because of the stress that they have. Brilliant people have to be in those positions, and their lives are actually shortened, very substantially shortened because of the stress, where you have many, many planes coming into one target, and you need a very special talent and a very special genius to be able to do it. Targeted disabilities are those disabilities that the federal government, as a matter of policy, has identified for special emphasis in recruitment and hiring. The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so.
Okay, hold it right there. I don't think so, President Trump said. President Trump came to the press room this morning and began a statement that lasted 17 minutes on the disaster. Let's resume where we left off.
I think it's just the opposite. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then I came in, and I assume maybe this is the reason. The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner. That guy's a real winner. Do you know how badly everything's run since he's run this Department of Transportation? He's a disaster. He was a disaster as a mayor. He ran his city into the ground. The Department of Transportation is government agency charged with regulating civil aviation. Well, he runs it, 45,000 people, and he's run it right into the ground with his diversity. So I had to say that it's terrible. Then it's a group within the FAA, another story, determined that the workforce was too white, that they had concerted efforts to get the administration to change that and to change it immediately. This was in the Obama administration just prior to my getting there. And we took care of African Americans, Hispanic Americans. We took care of everybody at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It's one of the reasons I won. But they actually came out with a directive, too white. And we want the people that are competent. But now we mourn and we pray and would like to ask all Americans to join me in a moment of silence as we ask God to watch over those who have lost their lives and bring comfort to the loved ones. And I just want to say God bless everyone in this room. This has been a terrible, very short period of time. We'll get to the bottom of it. So we all saw the same thing. We've seen it many times. I've had the honor of hearing tapes. Tapes are scary, very scary tapes. You had a airliner coming in, American Airlines. He was doing everything right. He was on track. He was the same track as everybody else. They came in. It's probably the same track as they've had for 25 years or more. He's coming in the path. And for some reason, he had a helicopter that was at the same height, obviously when they hit, but pretty much the same height, and going at an angle that was unbelievably bad. When the air traffic controller said, "Do you see?" He was talking about, "Do you see him?" But there was very little time left when that was stated. And then also he said, "Follow him in." And then almost immediately after that, seconds after that, there was the crash that took place. Well, you follow them in. That means like everything's fine. Follow them in. You had a pilot problem from the standpoint of the helicopter. I mean, because it was visual. It was a very clear night. It was cold but clear, and clear as you could be. The American Airlines plane had lights blazing. They had all of their landing lights on. I could see it from the Kennedy Center tape. We had a tape up on the Kennedy Center. That seems to be the primary. Thus far, I'm sure we'll see other tapes because it's such an area where there are a lot of cameras looking up into the air, into space. So we'll probably see many other shots of it before too much time goes by. But we had a situation where you had a helicopter that had the ability to stop. I have helicopters. You can stop a helicopter very quickly. It had the ability to go up or down. It had the ability to turn. And the turn it made was not the correct turn, obviously. It did somewhat the opposite of what it was told. We don't know that that would have been the difference because the timing was so tight. It was so little. There was so little time to think. But what you did have is you had vision. The helicopter had vision of the plane because you had vision of it all the way, perfect vision of it all the way from at Kennedy Center where the tape was taken. And for some reason, there weren't adjustments made. Again, you could have slowed down the helicopter substantially. You could have stopped the helicopter. You could have gone up. You could have gone down. You could have gone straight up, straight down. You could have turned. You could have done a million different maneuvers. For some reason, it just kept going and then made a slight turn at the very end. And by that time, it was too late. They shouldn't have been at the same height. Because if it wasn't the same height, you could have gone under it or over it, and nobody realized, or they didn't say that it's at the same height. At the same height, it still wouldn't have been great, but you would have missed it by quite a bit. Could have been 1,000 feet higher. It could have been 200 feet lower. But it was exactly at the same height, and somebody should have been able to point that out. So all of this is going to be studied, but it just seems to me from a couple of words that I like to use, the words common sense. Some really bad things happened, and some things happened that shouldn't have happened. So you had a helicopter going in an identical direction. You had a helicopter that was at the exact same height as somebody going in essentially the opposite direction. You had a plane that was following a track, which is a track that every other plane followed. And I don't imagine, I know I've heard today that they might have been following the preceding plane, which was pretty close, but not that close, the preceding plane. But you wouldn't have even been able to see that because of the direction that the helicopter was coming in at. So you had a confluence of bad decisions that were made. And you have people that lost their lives, violently lost their lives. We're going to take a few questions. I'd like to ask our new Secretary of Transportation to say a few words. Sean Duffy, great
to the
gentleman.
first question, I've got Caitlin Collins of CNN to the President, cut number 17. We don't have cut number 17 ready yet? Okay. I'll come back after the break and do that. The questions are themselves very revealing, and I'll make sure I get to that. After President Trump was finished with his remarks, Vice President Vance and Secretary of Transportation Duffy made comments, but I want to jump them and come back to them, to the interactions with the press. Here's Donald Trump, first question, Caitlin Collins of CNN, cut number 17.
Names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Black Hawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane, you think that's going to make a difference? They are a group of people that have lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that. We'll be giving that very soon. We're in coordination with American Airlines. We're in coordination very strongly, obviously, with the military. but I think that's not a very smart question. I'm surprised coming from you.
That was the first one. Please. Then we go to Peter Alexander of NBC, cut number 18.
Cited FAA text that you read is real, but the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is demonstrably false. It's been on the FAA's
Who said
website.
That, you?
No, it's on the website, the FAA's website. It was there in 2013. It was there for the entirety.
What I read.
It was there for the entirety of your administration
Nice and
too.
easy.
So my question is, why didn't you change the policy during your first
I
administration?
did change it. I changed the Obama policy, and we had a very good policy. And then Biden came in, and he changed it. And then when I came in 3 days ago, I signed a new order bringing it to the highest level of intelligence. Okay.
It was on the website.
Please.
Cut number 19 then. This is Mary Margaret Olhan of the Daily Wire.
Mr. President, is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly?
Go to what?
Is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly as well?
Well, sure. We want fast confirmations. And the Democrats, as you know, are doing everything they can to delay them. They've taken too long. We're struggling to get very good people that everybody knows are going to be confirmed, but we're struggling to get them out faster. We want them out faster. It's a good question, actually. We've been pushing Sean. Everyone knows Sean for a long time. He got many, many Democrat votes, but they want to take as long as they can. They ask questions like some of the questions that Peter would ask that were totally irrelevant and not very good questions, but they want to just keep it going. They want to keep it going as long as possible. I was very honored, actually, that you got so many Democrat votes. That was really good.
I got to say that running over Peter Alexander that way is to be expected if you ask an adversarial question at a time of tragedy, as opposed, do you want to explain a little bit more, as opposed to saying that's an outright falsehood? I have no idea. Peter's a good guy. I don't know if he's right or wrong. It's better to ask more questions than to go into adversarial mode. Vice President Vance then took the press room as well, cut number 13.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. I just want to reemphasize something the President said, and you've heard from the Secretary of Transportation and of Defense. There really was a whole of government response. We were all on the phone. We were all communicating yesterday, trying to get to the bottom of this immediately, but also try to communicate with the American people about what happened. Something the President said that I think bears reemphasizing, which is that when you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, but on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there. And I think that is a core part of what President Trump is going to bring and has already brought to Washington, D.C., is we want to hire the best people because we want the best people at air traffic control, and we want to make sure we have enough people at air traffic control who are actually competent to do the job. If you go back to just some of the headlines over the past 10 years, you have many hundreds of people suing the government because they would like to be air traffic controllers, but they were turned away because of the color of their skin. That policy ends under Donald Trump's leadership because safety is the first priority of our aviation industry. Thank you, Mr. President.
I agree with that. By the way, discrimination based upon race, the awarding of benefits or the infliction of penalties is unconstitutional. I don't know if the lawsuits are legit. I don't know if people were turned down on the basis of their not being a preferred category, but I do teach constitutional law, and I'm here to tell you it's unconstitutional to award benefits like a federal job or inflict a penalty like no, do not apply, based upon your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your country of origin, or your religion. You can do so based upon your physical capacity. You can do so based upon your mental acuity. You can do so based on any classification that is not suspect or even remotely suspect. There's a classification called intermediate scrutiny. If there's a rational basis for the reason that you're denied the job, and it's not related to race, gender, ethnicity, country of origin, or religion, it's okay. It's okay. I don't know what happened here. I do know the FAA preliminary report is there weren't enough people in the tower. That's bad. I want to thank one of the Substack people. If you belong to subtext people, if you belong to the universe, you can text me. And I want to thank all of you who've been sending me various leads. I already have Biden FAA pushing diversity hiring as air traffic control system falls into total disarray. is from October 27th of 2023 by Jason Cohen at the Daily Caller. And it's very, very clear that the FAA has been acting in an unconstitutional fashion when it comes to the hiring of air traffic controllers for at least 2 years. I don't know if that has anything to do with the shortage that's alleged to have been in place last night at Reagan DCA. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll continue to find out everything. I'm going to play for you a second, Sean Duffy. First, I did check the market during the break. The 10-year Treasury went up today. And the 10-year Treasury, which is paying out at 4.519%, was up a 16th of a point today. And that's not what we want. We want it to go down. And my friends at andrewandtodd.com, sponsors of this show, Sierra Pacific Mortgage is a sponsor of this show and has been for a decade. Sierra Pacific Mortgage makes mortgage loans. They make mortgage loans to first-time home buyers, to older people who are moving, like I did in 2016 back to the Beltway. They did the loan for my house in the Beltway. And you can get them to work on your side by calling 888-888-1172. They can't do anything about the 10-year. And most 30-year mortgages are based on an additional increment added on to the 10-year Treasuries. Of the 10-year Treasuries at 4.5 something, you're probably not going to get a loan in the sixes. You might be able to buy down a point or do something. That's a specialized world. And you shouldn't call someone that you hear for the first time as you're driving around and they just opened up the pop-up mortgage store down the street, especially if you're not new, or if you're not experienced in this, and really especially if you're trying to do something unusual, like you don't have proof. You're self-employed and you don't have proof of wages. You don't have a W-2 going back many years. If that's you, don't call that person the pop-up store. Call andrewandtodd.com at 888-888-1172. I've known Andrew for 20 years. I've known Todd for half that time. Sierra Pacific Mortgage has never changed its name over the 25 years I've been on the air. They just keep making loans. Reverse mortgages, VA loans, FHA loans, home equity lines of credit are back. 15-year loan, 20-year loan, whatever is best for you. andrewandtodd.com will get it done. And though the interest rates are higher now than they were in 2020 when COVID hit, we hope Donald Trump can bring them down by increasing productivity. And when they come down, if you have to buy a house right now, the good people, Andrew Del Rey or Todd Avakian, will call you up and they'll say, we can save you money and we can save you time. Time to refinance to X at Y. And they have a tickler system. And I've been the beneficiary of that system. Didn't know it was time to refi. They called me. Refi is a pain in the neck, but not as much of a pain in the neck when you do it with andrewandtodd.com. They make it easy. They keep your files. And come tax time, when you can't find your mortgage interest deduction, they got that too. 888-888-1172. I want to go back now to Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy at the White House today talking about what matters now, not in the Biden years, not in the Obama years, not any other time, but right now, Sean Duffy says this, cut number 12.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would just note the president's leadership has been remarkable during this crisis. We have had a whole of government response, local, state, federal, and when you see that kind of cooperation, it begins with the leadership in this body. So thank you for that, Mr. President. You make our jobs a lot easier. You made an important point that when we deal with safety, we can only accept the best and the brightest in positions of safety that impact the lives of our loved ones, our family members. And I think you make a really important point on that, Mr. President. That is the motto of your presidency, the best and the brightest, the most intelligent coming into these spaces. I want to take a moment and extend my condolences to the families of the loved ones. We commit to them that we are going to get to the bottom of this investigation, not in 3 years, not in 4 years, but as quickly as possible with the NTSB, who is here today, as well as the FAA. What happened yesterday shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened. And when Americans take off in airplanes, they should expect to land at their destination. That didn't happen yesterday. That's not acceptable. And so we will not accept excuses. We will not accept passing the buck. We are going to take responsibility at the Department of Transportation and the FAA to make sure we have the reforms that have been dictated by President Trump in place to make sure that these mistakes do not happen again. And again, I want to thank you for your leadership, Mr. President, and I appreciate the confidence you placed in me. Thank you.
Sean Duffy spent 8 years in Congress. He is a very competent person. He's a lawyer, very Catholic man, comes from a large Catholic family, good guy, got bipartisan support, blew through the Senate because everybody knows him up on the Hill. And first day on the job, he goes home. Maybe he's out having a celebratory dinner, and a Black Hawk hits an American Airlines airplane on approach to DCA. It's such a tragedy that 67 lives were lost. I'm very glad Sean Duffy is there. I believe we will get a report quickly, not going to vanish. NTSB takes a long time because they're very careful, but it doesn't take a long time to find out whether or not the FAA had that tower staffed appropriately and who was at the control. And don't blame an air traffic controller until we know that they actually screwed up. Don't believe the New York Times saying it was understaffed. If it's understaffed, that's not going to be the fault of the particular controller. It's going to be the fault of whoever staffed that controlling job. And it might not be them. They might have called that. We don't know anything. We know, though, that FAA cannot hire except people who are competent at the highest level. Pure merit. Right? There are very few jobs in the federal government that can be done on other than a pure merit basis. And if it results in a diverse workforce, great. If it results in a monochromatic workforce, not so great, but if that's what merit is, that's what it is. I don't think it will ever do that. I think there's a bell curve and everything. And really, we got to stop wasting time on this nonsense and get the best people to do the hardest job. I want to close a dark day with some good news. The Tennessee legislature today, in something that can make my friend Alfredo Ortiz over at our sponsor, Job Creators Network, very happy, Republican lawmakers today gave final approval to a $447 million statewide publicly funded school voucher program. Now, you should be asking, where? Which state? Well, today, Tennessee is the state that did the good thing. It's not universal school choice. It funds 20,000 vouchers. And those vouchers are each worth $7,300. All right? They can go to any, I don't know how they're distributing them, but 20,000 kids are going to win the ability to go to a private school, or their parents are going to get a tuition break on the private school. And they're not eliminating people who are already in private school. I think it's going to be a lotto. There's $7,300 per student, and there are 20,000 of these, and that's great. That's a start. Not universal school choice like Arizona, but it's a start. 20,000 kids either had their family burden lessened because they were already paying for a private school, or they got a chance to break out of a failing public school, one that does not meet their needs or one that is ideologically corrupt, and to go to one that meets their needs. That is so much what EducationFreedomUSA.com is about. EducationFreedomUSA.com, where you go to learn about every school choice program everywhere. There's Iowa, there's Ohio, there's Florida, there's West Virginia, there's Arizona, and now there's Tennessee, and I've probably forgotten some. There are school choice programs everywhere in the United States. And by the way, it's now on track. School funding, taxpayer funding for private schools is now on track, the fast track for the Supreme Court in an Oklahoma case involving a Catholic school in Oklahoma applying to be a public charter. They've been turned down by Oklahoma. I think that's unconstitutional. Court agreed to take the case to put on the fast track to have it briefed. I don't know if Justice Coney Barrett has recused herself. She did not participate in the decision to grant cert. It only takes 4 justices to grant cert. And SCOTUS blog didn't tell me if she's recused herself or not. But whether she is or not, I think it will be upheld that every school gets to apply for charter status and get money. And I love the Tennessee program, and I know so does Alfredo. Do your best to be part of this new civil rights movement. Go to educationfreedomusa.com. Educationfreedomusa.com. It's a new project of the Job Creators Network, and they know that if we're going to have a growing, booming economy, you've got to have smart kids who've been well taught with great schools that are free of ideology, both conservative and liberal, whacked out woke, or way too politicized. We just need the 3 R's and computer science. So come back tomorrow. In the meantime, go to educationfreedomusa.com. Come back tomorrow, and I will tell you my tale of fidelity. In the meantime, pray the old prayer. Eternal rest granted to them, O Lord, and may perpetual light shine upon them. May they rest in peace. Amen. For the 67 people who lost their lives last night on a cold night in D.C. and a terrible day for the United States.